Hey everybody, this is Peter from the Ultimate WordPress Guide, and in this video I wanted to take you through a little tour of a small project that I've been working on over the last couple of days, and that is creating a pricing calculator for a web design company. And it's pretty simple really. So there are a couple of things here. I've got a multi-step form where I gather some information about the website visitor, and then it goes through a couple of steps and asks a few questions. And at the end of the day, it calculates an estimated value that the user can get before he submits the form. So I've got some questions about domain and hosting. Then we look into a bit of the website details. What is this project all about? We look at some features required for the website. So stock images, copywriting, website add-ons, and so on. And then any extras, do you need logo design with it? Do you want a maintenance plan after the website is done? So obviously this is not the full design. I've created a simplified version of this, but as we go through the form and how I created it, I'm sure that you'll get the idea, and then you can customize it to your heart's content, really. The form builder that I use is really, really powerful. And I'll also be sharing the template file. So if you head over to the website, ultimatewpguide.com, head over to the tutorial section, and there you'll find a link to this video and also a link to download the template files. So whenever I design a website that requires some lead generation or form building, my go-to is Piotnet Addons. I use Elementor, and this is the perfect companion. So it's got a very powerful form builder to create multi-step forms, booking forms. It integrates well with Stripe payments, PayPal payments, Molly payments, and so on. And it's really powerful. There's a couple of cool extensions as well, and it has a library of very cool widgets. So this is obviously for Elementor, Piotnet Addons for Elementor. But if you're not an Elementor user, you can also head over to Piotnet Forms. Piotnet Forms is the form builder version that's included in Piotnet Addons, but it is compatible. It is a WordPress plugin, and it is compatible with all other page builders. So before we get started, head over to our YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications to stay tuned for more great videos. So let's get started. So let me begin by taking you through what this form really does, and I'll talk you through some of the things that I've built into the form, some intelligence, some range sliders, some conditional logic, and then I'll give you an idea, and then we'll go into the back end and explore that a little bit more, and I'll take you through all the details of what I've done to build this form. I've got a multi-step form on the front end, which is if I head over to my main page, which is just the multi-step form widget, that is available as part of the Piotnet Forms add-on. And if I go over to the next step, there are a couple of things about domain and hosting. So do you want to redesign an existing website? That's just a simple radio button, nothing fancy. But if I head over to the do you have a domain area, also a radio button, and if I click yes, it's just some conditional logic that asks the user to enter the domain URL. And if he says no, well then there's an option to upsell, an option to look at a couple of domain options. And as I select an option, you'll see that I've got a dynamic pricing calculator that will run across this form. And whenever I add an additional item, that amount will just keep rolling over until I get to the end of the form and actually submit it. Here I've asked the user to add a few domain names. I give them the option to select one of a couple of hosting plans, but again, this is customizable, and I'll show you when we get to the back end and how I've built it, how you can actually add your own flavor and your own versions and your own pricing options to this form. So if I click on next, this is where I want the user to tell me a bit more about the project. Is it a business website? Is it a blog? And by default for all of these, I want the user to tell me, give me an idea of how many pages he's looking for. And as I adjust this range slider, you'll see that it increments based on the value. So there's a value behind each of these keys that I've defined, and that then just increments the pricing calculator. Now some conditional logic again, if I click on the online store, it also gives me the option to add the number of products that I want, and again here it increments. Some additional feedback, and you can upload files, and you can set the type of files that you want the user to upload, and the quantity of files, and the size limit, and so on. Then on the next page, we've got again a couple of range sliders. These are pretty consistent across the form in terms of how we define the keys and the values, and how the range slider needs to behave, and how it needs to look and is visually displayed. And then same thing on the checkbox area down below. Wherever I select something, you'll see that depending on the number of additional website add-ons that I choose, it'll just keep incrementing the subtotal. And then on the last page, just a couple of extras, logo design. Do you need a website care plan or a maintenance plan after? Anything else you want us to know. And then something that I've added in additionally as well is, obviously first and foremost, do you agree with our privacy policy in terms of how we capture and use your information? And then if you've got a non-profit, we offer a 20% discount for non-profit organizations. And if you tick this, there's again some conditional logic and some calculated fields that tells you what the discount would be you qualify for. And then obviously an estimated quote, which can be confirmed once the user requests a quote. So you can just hit the button there and that'll send the web design agency or company an email saying, provide a quote to this person. So on the back end, just to start from the multi-step form and just looking at a couple of details there. So very simply, this is quite involved in terms of all of the other things that I need to build before I can have this multi-step form. And feel free to check out some of our other videos on how to create multi-step forms, how conditional logic works. So I won't go into too much detail of those in this video, but feel free to check out those videos. So on the multi-step form, there are a couple of things here. I've got a form ID, as you'll see from all the other videos. And if you've seen any of our videos, this is something that is quite consistent and it is required. And that's what allows you to very flexibly create these multi-step forms with fields pretty much however you like, and everything adds on to the same form. So then we've got the steps that we've created. So we've got a few step titles, and that brings us back to the template shortcodes. So if I just very quickly head over to my templates area, you'll see that I've got 5 different steps, which we'll go through in a bit more detail further along this video. But I've got 5 steps that I've defined here. And if I go back to the multi-step form, you see I've got 5 steps defined here, and each of them represents a specific template design. Now on the actions after submit is where I specify what it needs to do when the user clicks the request a quote button. So it needs to send me an email, and I'd like also to add it to my mailing list. And there are a couple of options here. You've got things like Active Campaign, HubSpot, MailChimp, MailerLite, and a couple more, MailPoet. So whichever one you choose, you can certainly customize and use that here. So again, here also on the multi-step form, you can add payment options, Stripe payment, PayPal, Molly payment, and so on. But on the email section, this is where when the user fills in the form, this is where it needs to send the email to, what the subject line is, which are all the fields that I want to include in this form. So that's very basic, the multi-step form, but let's look at all the details behind it. So I'm going to head over to the first template that I have, and that's just the basic, let's get more information about you, that has the user's first name, last name, email, phone number, and just some business or organization information. And these fields are pretty straightforward. I've got a couple of text fields, I've got an email, a phone field, but very importantly, as I mentioned before, the form ID is critically important to making sure that all of these details flow together, and that at the end of the day, all of the fields get captured into the same form across multiple templates. So I've got the form ID, which is consistent across all fields, and then that generates, once I put the field ID in, that generates a shortcode. And this is just a normal text field. So if I scroll through a couple of these, you'll see that's a text field. This is an email field, so it obviously needs to conform to specific criteria. And the same with the phone field, that's a telephone field. It has a particular pattern that it needs to follow, and you can put in some placeholder text. Okay, and you can obviously style this in any way that you want. If you go over to the styling tab, you can style the label, you can style the field itself, text color, typography, borders, and so on. So really simple on the first step. Now if we head over to the next step, this is where, as I mentioned earlier, I put some conditional logic in. So if you remember, if we just quickly head back to the form on step 2, so if I just refresh this real quick and I head over to the second step, you'll see that it's just got 2 radio buttons. So if I head back here, you'll see that it's got the radio buttons, and then there's a bunch of other fields, all of which I use conditional logic for based on the value of each of these fields. So on the first one, that's just a normal radio button field. I've given it a couple of options here. I've given it some styling, some additional styling, so I can either have the native option or I've chosen the more customizable option here. And there's nothing fancy about it really. I've told it that I want to use an inline list, but you can also have that sit vertically below each other. So there's no conditional logic on this field, because really this is the field that I want to drive the conditional logic on all the other ones. So I've got this field, and very importantly here, if I go back to the field, so let me just reselect, you'll see that this has a shortcode. So if I head over to this one, which is actually the field that drives the conditional logic, is if I head over to the please give us the domain URL, you'll see pretty much the same stuff. So I've got the form ID, I've got the field ID, shortcode, etc., etc. And if I head down to the conditional logic, this is where I need to tell it how it needs to behave based on the selection of another field. Okay, so in this instance, I said that I want to enable conditional logic for this field. Based on the shortcode of that field, I want, if the value equals to yes, I need to show that field. Okay, and the same thing applies here on the domain add-on. So if I head over to the conditional logic, here again, you'll see that if that value equals no in this instance, then it'll display that field. Now, what's pretty cool here is conditional logic with Piotnet add-ons doesn't only apply to fields that you use. So this is a normal Elementor text editor field, which I've just put a piece of text here. And obviously, as I go through here, none of these text fields needs to show when the user starts filling in the form. But based on the conditional logic, so if I say no, I also want this text field to display along with the field. So if I head back here and I go under the PAFE area, you'll see that there's a form builder conditional logic where I've applied pretty much the same thing. So I've given it the form ID, I said what the conditions are or the speed at which this animation needs to take place, and the type. There are only a few limited ones at the moment, but the important thing here is the conditional logic again. So if the shortcode equals a value, then display the text field. So it's not just limited to the form builder itself, but it also applies to any other Elementor element, and that's pretty cool. Yeah, so then again here I've got another form that has some conditional logic on, again on the domain. So if that is set to no, then it needs to show this value, and pretty much the same thing here. Now, a bit more detail, so let me just quickly head back onto the domain add-on one. Something that I've skipped over is the options. So I've got a blank option here because obviously I need to give the user the opportunity to not have anything selected, because I've got a calculated field down here that captures all of the values of the fields and gives me an estimated value. So I need to give sort of a dummy option. And then down here, you'll see that I've got two options defined. And if you look through the details below, you'll see that it has a key and a value pair. And these are just separated by a pipe symbol or a vertical bar where I define the key and I define the value. Now, what I also want to be able to do is when I send this through the email form, I want to be able to not send it by the value, because 50 is not going to mean a hell of a lot to me. If you've got a bunch of options down in this drop down, you know what, you want to be able to see the information. So here I've said that I want to send the data in the email by the label. So that's our label or key, and that's the value. So the value is what we use for the calculated field, and the key or the data is what I want to send in the email. So you've got a couple of additional options. You can put additional options in here. As I said, I'll share these template files along with the video on the website, and you can download them and customize these to suit. So then we've got the estimated subtotal, and this is quite a long field. And all it pretty much does is it calculates all of the information on all the fields, all the values that I have, and it brings it into this calculated field over here. Now, what I've done in this instance is I've actually brought together all of the values across each of the steps, so that regardless of whether I move forward or backwards in the field, it will still give me that same estimated value. So let me show you. So here I select the domain option, I select the hosting plan, I move forward, I select a couple of options here, but now I want to go back a couple of steps, so you'll see that that value remains the same, And if I make a couple of changes here, maybe change the hosting, you'll see that that value automatically updates. Yeah, and that applies, pretty much to any change that I make. So if I say that this is an online store and for some reason I change my mind, I go back, you can see the value stays there. I go forward again, I change this to a blog website where I don't need any products. So change that to a blog website, you'll see that that value over there updates. So this is just a normal radio button form again. So I've got a radio button and I've specified all of the options. Again, here you can add as many as you like. And there's not really a need to send the data by label because this is only a label. There's no value, no values against the key really here that does the calculation. That really comes down to the range sliders in terms of how many pages and templates do I need, or how many products do I need for my e-commerce store. So no conditional logic there. But the next one is a conditional logic field again, which is just a normal text field, which I want to invoke if the user selects the other option. Yeah, so it's very simple. If that value equals other, then show the field. Now the next one is the range slider. You can see that there's no range slider here. So if you head over to the front end, you can see that that's a range slider. The range slider uses a bit of JavaScript. So it doesn't display on the back end. So really just important, if you build this in your own way and you don't see the range slider on the back end, don't worry, it is there on the front end. You just need to give it all the required parameters in the back end and it'll work fine on the front end. Now there are quite a couple of things here and this field is quite involved. And let's start off just with the first section here, which is more around the styling and the behavior of the range slider. And then we've got our values of the slider itself and what it needs to return. And based on the value will drive what the estimated total in the calculated field needs to be, and then what it needs to return is basically just the values that I can see on the range slider here. So as you see, there's 0 pages, that's the estimated value. If I add 5, it adds the multiplication of the number of pages and the value that I've assigned to that range slider. So on here, you can head over to, so if you click on this link down here, let me just open that in a new tab. I'll show you what I'm on about. You'll see that there is a basic demo on how this works and some sample code. So if I just quickly head over to the home area, let's see where they are. So let's get started. So here you can see in terms of setup, if you needed to do this outside of the Piotnet Builder, it really gives you all of the fields that you need to use if you look at all the fields that are available. Yeah, so the different types, minimum and maximum values, from and to fields, how it needs to step values, etc., etc. So I'm not going to go through too much of this in this video, but you can head over to that link and it'll give you a clear idea of how all of this is defined. So heading back here, so I've got a skin option which is round, which gives us that little rounded effect on the handle. So there are a couple of other options. Again, refer back to that link and you can see what options are available. So here I've got a type, so I've got either a single or a double option. Yeah, so that has both a left and a right slider, so I can provide a range on the range slider. Do I want to display the grid? What is the minimum value? What is the maximum value? Where does the range slider need to start from? And what does it need to increment in? Yeah, the number of steps. And then there are a couple of other parameters that I can put in, like what is the maximum values postfix. And on the postfix itself, for the value of the range slider, I want to display a value. So here I can see I've got the 25 plus value, and regardless of where I move this, I've got a postfix of pages. So you can customize that in any way you like. And then we've got the values area. So as I mentioned earlier, these are the values that will be grabbed by the calculated field. And then I've got a couple of other settings, but feel free to look at the link down below just to get all of the different options that you have available. But you can get all of these from the template that I'll share. And the same thing on the products, pretty much the same. I've omitted the grid in this instance. Well, actually not, no, so there's the grid. I'm thinking of another field, which we'll get to in just a moment. But there the parameters are slightly different. So I've got a minimum of 5, I've got a maximum of 100. It starts from 0, but it steps in tens. And I've got a postfix, the max postfix, which is a plus, and then I've just changed the postfix to products. And here you can see the values are slightly different. and also the values. And you can see here that I can add strings actually to what it returns on the range slider. So if I head over to the online store, so I don't need any products, so I say no products, and as I go through 10 products, 25, 75, and 100 plus. So these are all customizable, and you can add as many fields in there as you like. So then we've got just a normal text area, nothing fancy here, where the user can put in some additional details. And then I've got the file upload area, which is the file upload type. I can specify the maximum size that's allowed, and I can give an error message if the file exceeds. And then I can also specify the allowed file types. So in this instance, I've left it blank, so I can upload pretty much any file that I like. And then onto the calculated field, same thing. So I'm not going to go through all of it here. You can grab the information from the template file, but this basically takes all of the fields into consideration. It takes the add domain field, it adds the hosting, because the hosting pricing on there is a monthly fee. It multiplies that by 12, and then it adds the number of pages, it adds the number of products if there are any stock images, if there are any add-ons, copywriting, logo design, maintenance plan, etc. So next, over to the additional features. Then again, here same thing, it's a range slider. So if I head back over to the front end, and we just skip over to that page, pretty much the same thing, range slider, that I've got a value and a key pair, or a key and a value pair, that calculates based on the number of stock images that you want. Or that could be anything, to that extent. Do you need copywriting, and I can specify a value there as well. So you can see there are a number of additional values on this one, and that's just because that's the requirement of the range slider, but everything else pretty much remains the same. If you look at the settings, the display settings, then we've got the value and the return pair, and a bit of JavaScript just to invoke that and execute. And then I've split this up into 2 fields just to get it spread over an inner section, and I have just a normal checkbox really. And in here, same thing as I did with the radio button before, I've got a key and I've got a value separated by the pipe symbol or the vertical bar, whichever terminology you choose, but the principle remains the same. And you can customize this and add all of the different fields that you want. And as I've shown you already, whenever I get to the calculated field, so if I just look at the short code on this one, this is called Addons 2 and this one is called Addons 1. So part of the calculated field is, if I just scroll to the right, you'll see that I've got Addons 1 and I've got Addons 2. So it just keeps accumulating value as I go through the pricing form. And then lastly, I've got an extras form or a template, which has another range slider for logo design. So if I go into the logo design, pretty much the same stuff as I've shown you on the previous ones. And here I've got an image select field. So you'll recognize this perhaps from the multi-step form video that I did a couple of weeks ago. And this is really just, it gives me the option to create a select type field, give it a value or a key and a value pairing, sending data by label. But I can then also add a few images from my image library and I can move them around in whichever order I want. And I can add some additional images based on the number of options that I have, and it'll associate in the sequence that I've placed the images with the sequence of the options that I've provided. Okay, so there's no conditional logic in this regard. And then I have the normal text field or text area where I ask for some additional information. And then I've got an acceptance field here that has some acceptance text that says, have you reviewed the policy? Click. What I haven't talked about a lot is obviously the required field. So obviously you want to have a lot, but not necessarily all of these fields required, but I can set that to required. And then obviously the user won't be able to move forward unless they have ticked that box. And then I've got the last one, which is this a website for a non-profit? And we offer a discount. But then there's some conditional logic again to this. So if I look at the non-profit discount here, which is also just a calculated field that captures all of the information from the previous fields, like the grand total field in this instance, it's just renamed, and that just multiplies that by 0.2, which gives me a percentage value. And then I've got another calculated field down here, which just takes the grand total, it subtracts the non-profit discount, and that gives me the total after discount. So again here, the short code for this field is non-profit, And if I go to the conditional logic, I've said that I want to show this field if the non-profit field is checked. And I've done the same on the total field. So on the conditional logic area, show this field if the non-profit field is checked. So if I quickly head over to the front end of the form, so here I've got that. I can select some additional options so you can see the grand total there. I've reviewed and accepted the privacy policy, and is the website a non-profit? It just gives me a calculated value there for the discount, and it then subtracts that value from here. To click here, the user can request a quote, and that'll send an email to me. It'll add them to my mailing list, and we're good to go. And that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you found it useful or helpful, please let us know in the comment section below. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to our channel, hit the bell for notifications, and stay tuned for more great content. I've put a few links to tools, services, and plugins that I use in the description below, including a link to the website where you can download the template files and links to Piotnet Forms and Piotnet Addons for Elementor. These are affiliate links. If you purchase a product through one of them, I will receive a commission at no additional cost to you, of course. I only endorse products that I've personally used, and your support helps me to put out more great content. So thanks. Bye for now.